Hi, gay. So to continue my Pride Month videos, I decided that I'm going to be talking about something that is controversial, or at least has been controversial, both in and outside of the LGBT community. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about asexuality, or the exclusion of asexuality from the community, or just like discrimination against asexuality in general, so let's get into it. Before I actually get into this discussion, I do want to briefly go over what asexuality is, because not a lot of people know. Asexuality, to put it briefly, is the lack of sexual attraction, and just like all identities, it falls along a scale. So you could be anywhere from feeling some sexual attraction to feeling none at all. A similar identity would be aromanticism, or being aromantic. It's the same thing, but with romantic attraction as opposed to sexual attraction. You can be both aromantic and asexual, or you could be one or the other, doesn't matter. For this video specifically, I'm going to be talking about asexuality because that is how I personally identify, and because I just don't know as much about aromanticism as I do about asexuality. In terms of identifying as asexual, there are three main points along the spectrum that people tend to identify. The first one is sex repulsed, feeling absolutely no sexual attraction and not having any need to have sex at all. Sex neutral, which is basically sex exists, I don't really need it though. And then there's sex positive, people who are asexual, but maybe they want to have sex just for whatever reason. And I know that that might seem like a little complicated, because how can you identify as asexual and still be positive towards sex or want to have sex? And there's two main reasons for that. The first one is because not everyone's partner is also asexual. So if you have a partner who isn't asexual, they may want to have sex, and you might do that anyway. Because why not? I forgot to actually say it in the video because I'm a bad YouTuber, but the second reason is basically just because you don't feel sexual attraction doesn't mean that you don't still feel stuff, like nerve endings still exist. You can still get enjoyment out of sex despite not feeling any sexual attraction in your head. So that's the reason. But yeah, that was just a very brief overview of what asexuality is before we get into the actual discussion. If you are questioning whether or not you may be asexual, there are wonderful resources online, and you can also talk to people in the asexual community if they are willing to talk to you. Usually they're very nice, but you know. So now that we have briefly gone over asexuality, I'm going to get into some of the discourse or arguments, I guess, that come up around asexuality. Just a quick definition, if you are neither asexual or aromantic, you are considered to be allosexual. That's just a general term that is used. So if you hear me say allosexual, I am referring to people who are neither asexual or aromantic. So in terms of discussions around asexuality, the main question really is, for me personally, is just why people are so weird about it. Because if you think about it, you're not really doing anything, or you're doing less of something than someone else, so why would people be mad about that? And I think the main thing that leads into that is that a lot of allosexual people are really uncomfortable with talking about sex. And so I feel like when you are asexual, I don't know, I personally feel disconnected from sex, so I don't really care about talking about it. So I feel like when you are someone who is very much so connected to that, it feels weird to talk about it, and therefore you don't really want to learn a lot about asexuality, which can lead to some confusion, which, you know, is kind of a bullshit excuse, but it is an excuse that some people have. And in terms of being ignorant about asexuality, it definitely shows up, at least for me personally, in day-to-day conversations, even with other queer people. A majority of my friend group is queer, if you couldn't tell from the everything about me. A lot of my friends are gay, and they really don't quite understand what asexuality is or what it means. It's just very funny, because they kind of assume that you're a robot and you don't know anything about sex at all, ever. If I make a sex joke, or a sexual joke at all, I will at least get two responses of people being but you're asexual, and it's yeah. And it's very weird, and it just kind of goes to show that people don't really know very much about asexuality, or they're just not willing to learn anything about it. In terms of the discussion around asexuality, one major point in internet history comes to mind, and you may be aware of it if you're watching this video, and that is 2015 Tumblr. 2015 Tumblr was a very weird time to be on the internet. I would know as someone who was on 2015 Tumblr. It was mostly arguing between transmedicalists and people who aren't transmedicalists. If you don't know what a transmedicalist is, or if you don't know what 2015 Tumblr was rest assured I'm gonna explain it. I want to clarify that both transmedicalists and non-transmedicalists are members of the overall like queer community, but transmedicalists are definitely more like conservative in their beliefs. So they don't believe that you can be trans without dysphoria. They think that you have to be dysphoric in order to be trans. They think that pansexuality isn't a real thing and it's just bisexuality with like a different name. They believe that ace and aromantic people don't belong in the LGBT community inherently, and they're just pretty nasty people overall. And there was definitely a lot of fighting between these two groups going on Tumblr at the time, and if you didn't pick a side, it was very strange. It was like a weird like mini internet civil war, which you may not know. But I was actually on the transmedicalist side for many years. I was like a hardcore transmedicalist from the ages of like 12 to 14. This was largely because of two reasons. For one thing, I still held a lot of internalized transphobia, and also because a lot of my mutuals, like people who like we followed each other, were also transmedicalists, so I kind of felt like pressured to like also take part in that. I want to clarify that, again, I was like 13 years old. There was a lot of harassment going on from transmedicalists harassing non-transmedicalists. I was not one of those people because I was like 13. But just to clarify, yeah, I definitely was a transmedicalist, which is very strange to look back on. A little bit of a side note, but actually it's very strange how I fell into transmedicalism. It actually was through Spider-Man fan art. Because I was like, there was like this really like big thing about like thinking that Peter Parker might be trans. And so a lot of people would make fan art of Spider-Man being trans. And so I would follow those people, and then they might follow me back. And then they would start posting a bunch of transmedicalist shit, and it was like, what? I followed for the Spider-Man fan art and the Spider-Man trans headcanon. Where is this coming from? It was very weird. A weird pipeline to fall down. But anyways, I'm like much better now. I'm non-binary, pan, and asexual, so you know, you got nothing to worry about. I've grown as a person, okay? And I wasn't speaking lightly when I said that people were getting harassed on Tumblr for their beliefs. It was very common, and it happened quite a lot, and the people still have like, I don't know if I should say that they're like triggered by it, but like there are still people who definitely like get like flashbacks to 2015 Tumblr and being harassed by people on 2015 Tumblr because it was such a hostile environment at the time. And it was definitely a weird environment for someone like myself who now identifies as asexual to be on, because like I had this like sneaking suspicion in the back of my mind like, hey, you should check out that asexuality thing because I think you'd be into it. But then I would see all my mutuals be like, no, you can't be asexual at all, ever. It's actually bad. And so it just sort of like implanted into my brain, and I didn't realize until years afterwards that like, oh yeah, actually asexual is pretty cool. And the real question is just like, why? Why were people so adamant about hating asexuals? Like, why do people go so far out of their way to say that asexual people are not a part of the community? Because that was the main thing in the discourse on Tumblr, was people saying that, like, sure, asexual people can do whatever they want, but they're not queer. So the question is, like, a bit rhetorical, right? Because it's just like asking, like, why do people hate gay people, or why do people hate trans people? But, you know, we can at least, like, hypothesize as to why people hate asexuals in particular. So I don't really want to, like, go into it, but I do want to say that asexuals have always been a part of the community. Asexuality, much like being transgender, is not a new thing by any means. It's very common, or not, well, I mean, like, it's about as common as, like, any other queer identity is. But you know what I mean? Like, within the community, it's pretty normal for someone to be asexual, and asexuals have existed historically. So, like, it's not like it's, like, a new thing trying to take over the community. They've always been here, and they've always been fighting for the rights of all queer people. So why do some queer people go out of their way to hurt asexuals? So there are two major, like, differences between asexual and, I guess, aromantic people and the rest of the community. The first one is relatively simple. So most queer people don't outwardly present as queer, right? Like, we have this stereotype about, like, you know, dyed hair, piercings, and pronouns, but, like, you don't have to look that way. It's just that a lot of people choose to. Well, with asexual people, it kind of goes into another layer. Because if you are gay or trans and you outwardly present as gay or trans, like if you look, like if you don't pass very well, or if you have a significant other and you want to be seen together, then you're not really hiding it very much, you know, like people can tell that you are a part of the queer community. Whereas with asexuality, unless you are also gay or trans on top of that, you can kind of like hide a bit in a sense. Mind you, I'm saying this as a trans and asexual person, okay? Like, I don't mean to like, I know it sounds weird coming out of my mouth like I'm trying to be like exclusionary. I'm not at all. It's just easier to hide, especially if you are a straight asexual person or a single asexual person. And not to go like on another tangent, but I do want to add on to this in terms of like outwardly presenting as a marginalized group. I've seen a weird amount of people online trying to say that queer people are just as oppressed as Black and brown people. And that's not true at all. Stop saying that. You know it's not true. And then the other major reason is that asexual people aren't really that good of a target for people outside of the LGBT community. So like, if you are homophobic or transphobic, a number one talking point that is used is, oh, they're sexual deviants. They're coming for your children. They're sexual little freaks, you know? But if you're asexual or aromantic, you're not really like having relationships or having sex. So like, there's nothing really to grasp onto and to claim that they're so evil about, because they're not really doing the thing that you claim that they're evil for, you know? And so it kind of adds like this another layer of protection. Again, this is assuming that this person is like cis, straight, and asexual. It kind of adds this other layer of protection onto them as opposed to like other queer people. And so I feel like that just kind of leads to some resentment. And this resentment is mostly pushed towards all asexuals, but it definitely is pushed towards straight asexuals as well, which I personally believe that straight asexual people do belong in the community, but like, it's up to them ultimately to decide whether or not they personally identify as a part of the LGBT community. I personally will accept them with open arms, but you know, who am I to say? Either way, you shouldn't be a douche. You shouldn't be a jackass to other asexual people just because they don't identify in the exact way you want them to, you know? All in all, just be a nice person. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I also make videos about art, politics, and Satanism, so be sure to check those out. I hope that you're safe and have a happy Pride Month.